What's going on, everybody? It is the one and only Q from Retro Q Gaming here with a very special 53rd episode of our Quack experimental podcast. This one coming at you, depending on how you want to call it. Some people will call it Q After Dark. I'm more of a midnight Q kind of guy myself. But you may be wondering, what's the deal? Well, it's late. My bulb went, and because of the coronavirus, I haven't got a chance to go out and replenish my spare bulbs lately. So instead of doing the logical thing and going to another room and taking out one of the bulbs from there, I decided we'll go all midnight Q on this bad boy. Now, we have lots to talk about this week because, as you may have noticed, last week there was no podcast. There was very, very little to talk about last week, and I was just completely drained mentally because of the lack of Final Fantasy VII Remake. More on that later. So what we did was I had a little bit of a tech talk with Too Much Food from Game Buffet. We were just talking about random stuff, and we kept meaning to do it publicly sometime. And you know what? Felt like the best time because I knew I wasn't going to have one. So that's on the channel if you want to go back, check that one out last week. But anyway, until then, join me. Midnight Q, here we go. First little segment, we're going to start with Crysis Remastered. Now, yes, that's right, Crysis Remastered was officially announced very shortly after it was leaked to exist, basically. Now, Crysis Remastered is going to be coming to PC, Xbox, PS4, and, strangely enough, Nintendo Switch. It currently has a summer 2020 release date. Other than that, they haven't gone into specifics about the date, but there's not a huge amount to talk about when it comes to it just yet, other than one or two, I won't say important things, but one or two interesting things anyway. So, other than it being ported to the newest engine, or the newest version of CryEngine, there's something really interesting about that. You might remember a little while back, I talked about a CryEngine update. Now, that's, digging deep into somewhere. I don't believe I made a dedicated video on it, but what was very interesting about it was that the newest version of the CryEngine used software-based API-agnostic ray tracing, which basically meant that it didn't require specific hardware with the likes of the NVIDIA's RTX 20 series. It didn't need something like that to push hardware-powered ray tracing. No. All this is software-based ray tracing, so no matter what GPU you have, from what manufacturer you have, you can, in theory, use this engine to ray trace your stuff. Now, of course, results remain to be seen just yet, not to mention with the likes of, say, an RTX card, which obviously has the native hardware for it. Can that do it significantly better? We just don't know yet. What's the non-RTX versions like? If I boot it up with my 1080, which obviously isn't an RTX card, what kind of performance will I get? What kind of performance will AMD cards get, both in the existing stuff as it is and the alleged going forward stuff that's going to have hardware-based ray tracing, like their big Navi, if it ever materializes at this point. But that's the main interesting thing about this as well. So it doesn't need, the standard Windows DXR. It doesn't need the hardware-based ray tracing from the RTX Tensor cores, anything like that. So I'm curious from a technical standpoint how this is going to work, as well as the performance load, the performance quality, and the visual quality and ray tracing quality as well. Now, having said that, since this is coming to PC, Xbox, PS4, and Switch, because the engine supports it on a software-based level, I have a feeling that Xbox, PS4, and God forbid Nintendo Switch users are expecting ray tracing, because the press release, if you will, the press release talking about this and talking about the announcement, it was worded very poorly. They clearly mentioned all platforms, and they clearly mentioned the engine and all features. Of course, people not well versed in tech understood that as Xbox, PS4, and Switch getting ray tracing. Now, to me, it reads as the engine supports ray tracing, which we all know is true, but most likely the PC is going to be the only version with it. The Xbox, the PS4, their GPUs are bad enough as it is, let alone to try power ray tracing, even if it is software-based ray tracing, let alone I'm not even going to touch the Switch, because that's going to be a slideshow mess as it already is. But anyway, we'll see. There is one other thing I have to talk about when it comes to Crysis Remastered. Because EA games are now coming back to Steam, I'm not expecting a free upgrade. So I may have to acquire this through other means. Because I would like to see how it looks and how it runs. Not just on my 1080, but just as a remaster in general. How much has it been remastered, if you will? So, expect that on Steam. And probably, well, expect it on Origin, but probably Steam down the line as well. And when I say down the line, I mean at launch. But, a couple of months away anyway. So we can move from there onto E3 2020. Now, E3 2020 has been cancelled officially, as we already know. And this is all, of course, down to the coronavirus and all that, and the COVID-19. But it was originally intended and planned to be kind of migrated and swapped over to a centralized ESA-hosted digital event. ESA, of course, is the kind of, I won't call it governing body, but it's basically the corporation, the head company, if you will, that put on the E3 Expo. So they were going to do that, but just as a one centralized digital event where all the different publishers could maybe have like a portal, or they could have their trailers, and then of course they could do their big presentation streams and all as well. But given the fact that this now digital event is completely cancelled as well, does it really matter? I mean, if all the companies were going to do all their live stream presentations or video archives of their presentations and all that as well, not to mention all the trailers would instantly be put up on YouTube, is there really a point to this? Was there really a need for a digital expo just for everyone to do their streams and their videos and video on demand and premieres and all as it was? It just, to me, it just screamed as, hey, look, we're still here, we're still relevant, we're still hip, we're still with it. That kind of shit. But I don't know. I mean, it's no secret that every year E3's numbers do decrease, especially with stuff like Gamescom going up and up and up. You've got Tokyo Game Show up and up and up. And of course, the increase in digital presentations throughout the year, or digital presentations that are just done whenever, or, so it doesn't feel like they're completely irrelevant yet. But, well, not looking good, at least for 2020. Anyway, but speaking of stuff in 2020, let's talk about some stuff that's probably not going to be here this side of 2077. No, we're not talking Cyberpunk, we're talking Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, in this little segment, we're going to bring up Final Fantasy VII Remake a couple of times tonight, but in this one, I want to talk about some hardware limitations. Now, of course, we all know when you look at the majority of everything that they publicly showed off for Final Fantasy VII, pre-launch, it was all great looking stuff. Even when they included the demo with the opening bombing mission of Final Fantasy VII on the PS4, it looked great. All the assets, all the quality, all the texture detail, all of that looked really good. Cloud looked great, all the other characters looked great, the environments looked great. But when people got their hands on the game, they figured out very fast and very, very starkly that there were some hardware limitations. Some severe hardware limitations. Now, we're not talking, of course, that the fact that the game doesn't run at 60 FPS, which is a disastrous hardware limitation within itself, but we're talking texture memory, because it is completely fucked in the full version of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, this happens on both the base PS4 and the PS4 Pro, but, woo lad, it kind of makes perfect sense when you look at it, because they've only ever showed off very, very specific things. They've showed off, like I said, the bombing mission, the opening mission of the game, the main characters and all, stuff that the fact that you're going to have the opening of the game, and that's the thing everyone recognizes and everyone gets shown. Of course, they're going to put all the effort and detail into that. The main characters, you're going to see them consistently, constantly throughout the entire game. So of course, they're going to put it into that as well. Now, there are far too many scenes with PS1 and PS2 era quality textures. And that's not an exaggeration. You can go and look online. You will see something that should be a circle, something that should be round, and it will be jagged like an octagon, and it will be a blurry mess of textures. It will look worse than a Switch game. Imagine me saying that. That's, yeah, basically the geometry can be completely fucked. Backgrounds can be an absolute disaster. Again, PS1 and PS2 era backgrounds. And then you've got these really high quality characters in front of them, and you're probably thinking, "Oh, Q, you're just being exaggerative. Is that even a word? You're just blowing it over the top and out of proportion." No, you go and look. There's tons of documents of this now, and it's just an absolute disaster in so many of that, because there is a large, not just, I shouldn't even say a large, there is an absolutely huge amount of this reported in almost every, I'll say, non-major part. And when I say non-major part, I'm not talking something that you spend like 4 hours in. I'm talking something there's 1 or 2 specific set pieces, and then everything else in the 2 hours in between looks like an absolute mess. So that's a bit of a problem. Now, this annoys me on so many levels, because when you think about it, this game, which promises to be great, yes, spoiler alert, I still do not have my copy yet. We'll talk about that one later. But it just kills me to know that the Sony money bought a fucking 1-year timed exclusive on this, because thanks to non-shitty out-of-date hardware, non-shitty unsuitable CPUs and GPUs, and of course nowhere near anything along the lines of crappy memory limitations. Well, we all know that the PC version is going to be the best version, but unfortunately, because of Sony, we have to wait 1 year for that. But I look forward to having real texture memory, real resolution, real frame rate, of course, being the key most important thing, and, well, it will probably not even cost full price at the time as well, which makes it even better. So, until then, it's an absolute shit show that this happened, and it kills me inside. I'm sure the game is going to be great if I ever get to play it at this rate, but it's one of those times where it really feels like money took precedence over everything else. Of course it did, but this is one of the more stark and glaring versions of, hey, this is cripplingly, woefully bad in many ways, because we took the money to develop for pieces of shit hardware. Hate it. Absolutely hate it. But it does have a little bit of a knock-on effect to our next one that we're going to talk about, and that is developer choice. Now, if you're wondering what this is, what I'm talking about, developer choice is something I've brought up multiple times before, including one very, very recently, where basically you have developers who are programming games and all, focusing on the wrong things. Maybe they want to push the settings as high as possible based on the hardware, they want to push the resolution, and of course, because of something like that, maybe if you push resolution, you get absolute dirt quality textures and assets, and of course your frame rate tanks. Or maybe you push something like high quality textures and all too, but then it forces you to run the game at 720p, 24 FPS. Now, this is a big concern we have going next gen too, because, well, I'm sure developers could make games in 8K if you want to run them at 16 FPS, but it sounds good to say, hey, we have a game running at 8K, or making a screenshot or something like that. Now, the more common and specific aspect we want to talk about in this one is the Xbox One X, specifically when it comes to Capcom and the Resident Evil 3 remake. Now, what happened with this is when this game was first launched and originally patched once or twice, the Xbox One X version ran at 4K. I say 4K with big air quotes there, because despite what many people will say, if you look into the technical analysis and technical aspect of it, it was not real 4K. The game rendered at 2160p, but that 2160p was made up of a fake interpolated and checkerboard version of a lower resolution. That lower resolution was not discerned, but it came out as an output of 4K using these techniques. Now, of course, because of this, despite being the more powerful console, the Xbox One X versus the PS4 Pro, the performance of the Xbox One X version barely touched 60 FPS. Mostly it varied wildly, and I'm talking hugely wildly, between 30 to 45 FPS, which is awful when it's just all over the place like that. Even a solid 30 is bad, but varying wildly from 30 to 40 to 45 to 32 to 47 to 50, it's absolutely awful. Now, this has since been patched again. I believe it's version 1.0.5, I think it is the current one. And this was patched to lower the resolution to improve the frame rate. Now it does this. We'll talk about that in a moment. But what they've done is they've lowered the resolution to a fake 1620p, down from a fake 2160p. Now currently this is running at technically the same resolution as the PS4 Pro version, but it's still a little bit strange because the PS4 Pro 1620p is also faked from a lower resolution, but the Xbox One X, while faked from a lower resolution from 1620p, is still at a higher resolution, if you will, than the PS4 Pro. How does that work? Well, both games are technically outputting 1620p. Let's just use random numbers for examples, just to illustrate the point. The Xbox One X version might really be rendering at 1080p and then interpolating and just using your checkerboarding and all upwards to get up to 1620, versus the PS4 Pro version, which might be 720p and is then using all these techniques and whatnot, the checkerboarding and all, to get up to it. So it still has, the Xbox One X version still has a slightly higher true resolution. But again, at this point, it's negligible, and who really cares? I mean, it's going to illustrate this point here, but it's still non-native sub resolution, which is bad enough as it is. But because of this new patch, the one that will drop it to a fake 1620p, the game runs, at least in gameplay anyway, at an almost 100% locked 60 frames per second, which of course is very important. The cutscenes in this game are still a mess. You could have them drop from 60 down all the way to 32, right up to 45, then 57 and 32. Again, it's an absolute mess on all consoles. So the cutscenes in this game are really, really weird in how they're handled. But this goes back to show developers making terrible development decisions, choices, and priorities. I mean, they all have this mentality. It's like, gotta push them pixels. Who needs frames? As long as the single frame looks good. Who needs more than one frame, am I right? 60 frames per second? 30 frames per second? A cinematic 24? Bro, give me 1 frame per second. As long as it's running at a 24K resolution. That's what these cunts think. Just because it's easy to put out the screenshots and whatnot too. Hopefully, of course, they cop the fuck on and they get the right balance between resolution, frame rate, quality settings and all as well. There are, of course, some things out there that I shouldn't even mention, but insider sources and insider leaks and all, as they claim, that the majority of games on the next gen, at least on PS5, because of the, I suppose you could call it, because of the inferior CPU and GPU compared to the Xbox Series X, they allege that most games will be running at a true resolution of 1800p and outputting at 60 frames per second. So, yeah, now, to be honest, that would be better. I would hate to see them running games at 4K just to tank the frame rate from 30 to 45 to 50, something like that, and be all over the place. So, keep expectations. For you guys out there, keep expectations in line. And for developers out there, just get the fuck out of here, because do the right thing. Do the right choice. But speaking of upscaling and fake resolutions and whatnot, we're going to talk about a new type of software and algorithm called DLSS 2.0, which is the new updated version of NVIDIA's proprietary technology on their RTX cards. Now, what this stands for is Deep Learning Super Sampling, which is very, very sketchy as a name because it's a complete misnomer. But what happened, or what this is anyway, it's NVIDIA-based tech for the RTX 20 series cards, the touring cards, will probably, of course, will be included on the next series cards, but will we have something like a DLSS 3.0? We just don't know yet. But basically what this does is this uses AI deep learning to upscale the image for massive performance gains. So first off, this is a very deceptive name because super sampling means rendering a true native picture, a true properly rendered picture, higher than your display resolution, and shrinking it down. So, for example, if I'm running my main monitor here at 1440p, which is 2560 by 1440, maybe I super sample from 4K. So I render the image properly, fully, at 4K, which is what, 3840 by 2160. And then I compress that down, more pixels than my monitor holds, compress it down into the 1440p image. It gives you a cleaner image overall, it gives you less jaggies, it gives you better quality overall, but it has a very high performance cost, mainly because it's rendering at a much higher resolution. So yeah, that's a bit of a problem. So that's what super sampling is. Now, with this one, this is a little bit different, because this is actually upscaling, not super sampling, because DLSS renders below your native resolution and it uses the AI and deep learning to upscale the image and fill in the blanks better than it would with just a regular, I suppose you could call it regular scaler, but just regular scaling, if you will. Now, everyone is praising this like crazy for its massive performance gains and all as well, but of course it's going to give you big performance gains. You're running at sub-native resolution. That would be the same as me running a game at 720p on my 1440p monitor. Of course I'm going to get massive improvements in frame rates as well. You don't buy fancy, new, expensive GPUs to render at sub-native resolutions. I don't understand this praise, really. Now, I've seen many videos on this topic just so far. I've seen ones from places like Digital Foundry, I've seen the ones from Nvidia and all as well, and almost every single person and every single person involved in this will say the obvious thing. Even though it's very, very close, and it's very, very close in picture and image quality, it does not equal or surpass native rendering quality. It's very, very similar. You can see slight differences, and you do get big performance gains. So I can understand that part of it. But again, you don't buy an RTX 2080 Ti to render a game sub-natively. If you're not happy with the frame rate, drop 1 or 2 settings. The big difference is your native resolution. It's clear. I mean, they've thrown out numbers and all with AI and, you know, their deep learning and all that it will render something as big as 64 times super sample and then shrink it down. If they could do that, then why can't they render that properly? It's deep learning, it's AI, it's not really there. It's upscaling. Again, it's not really there. It's using techniques to interpret what they believe would be there. Again, it looks better than a regular 720p image scaled up without proper filtering and proper upscaling and whatnot, but it's still, as is proven by Nvidia, by everyone else as well, or at least almost everyone, and anyone who knows what's up, it still is noticeably not as good. Almost. And you do get the performance. But hey, if you want to render sub-natively for performance gains, stop buying a 2060. And you do you. But anyway, we'll look at the PS5 joypad next anyway. So the PS5 joypad, which of course is called the DualSense, not the DualShock 5. This is only going to be a very little topic because we're not actually talking about the controller itself anyway. Just how much of a joke the media and all that is. Because when this was announced at the start of last week, at the time, I joked because I knew it would happen 100% that your regular fanboy websites, your individual platform websites and all as well, that they would have 20 articles within a week about it. Now, at the time, the night of this announcement, when it happened, Push Square, a notable Sony exclusive website, they had 0 articles about it when I started recording about the DualSense 5 that night. They had 3 articles about it by the time I finished the audio portion of that video. They had 6 articles by the time I finished editing, uploading and publishing my video. And then at the time of taking these notes, which was last Sunday night, so whenever that was, just about a week ago, they actually had 20 articles about the PS5 controller, which is funny because that is the exact number I predicted. I think they've maybe 2 more in the space of this week, but it was announced on something like a Monday or Tuesday night, and I predicted 20 within a week. I wasn't specifically aiming at them, but they proved me right. 20 in a week. Laughable. Absolutely laughable. But speaking of things that is not laughable, we have Cyberpunk 2077. Now, this is going to be our one of 2 Cyberpunk 2077 topics that we're going to talk about this week. But our first one is interesting and promising, because what happened this week, Cyberpunk 2077 developer, CD Projekt Red, they had an investor conference call. So naturally there was a lot to go over in there too. Now, there wasn't a huge amount of things that I wanted to talk about in this, but there was a few that I did. So, as I mentioned before, Sony haven't announced a version of Smart Delivery for their PS5 yet, or they haven't announced a Smart Delivery-esque equivalent, if you will. Now, if you're wondering what Smart Delivery is, that is the one that would, on the Xbox Series X at least anyway, that's the one that will, if you put an Xbox One game into an Xbox Series X, it will give you the best version of the game. It will give you the Xbox One X enhanced version if there's no Xbox Series X version. Some developers may opt to give you an upgrade to an Xbox Series X version for free. Some may do it as a cost, or some may not do it at all. But basically, it will give you the best version of the game that is available, that you have access to. Again, I say access to because if they do charge an upgrade version of it and you haven't purchased that, it will only give you the Xbox One X enhanced version of it. So that's what Smart Delivery is. And Sony haven't announced anything like that yet. Yet being the key word. Because what they have done is, this was talked about in the conference call, and that CD Projekt Red were asked about it, and they can't comment on the PS4 to PS5 Smart Delivery / upgrade situation because, and I quote, they don't want to jump ahead of Sony. Interesting stuff there. So the whole, there might be there's still a couple of months before the PS5 comes out. There's still a couple of times that Sony could have talked about all of this. There's still plenty of time for them to talk about it, but we just don't know yet. And the fact that they don't want to jump ahead of Sony means one of 2 things. They're either under an NDA, and actually it means one of 3 things. They're either under a non-disclosure agreement and they know and can't talk about it. They don't know yet, or, well, when I say they don't know if there is or isn't a system like this, or they know that there's not a system and they can't talk about it because Sony haven't talked, or they don't want to talk about it because Sony haven't talked about it. Now, this next gen Smart Delivery upgrade as well, when it comes to the Xbox Series X, this one is going to be available, kind of, if you will, on the Xbox Series X. So, how is that going to work? Well, they have said, CD Projekt Red have announced that if you put the Xbox One version of the game, which will launch before the Xbox Series X, if you put that into the console, it will give you the Xbox One X version of the game. Because at launch, the Xbox Series X version will not be available. Now, they said a full next-gen version will be available down the line, but it will not be available at launch. So if you buy an Xbox Series X day one, bring it home, put in your copy of CD Projekt Red put in CD Projekt Red copy of Cyberpunk 2077. It will give you the Xbox One X version. Of course, that will be enhanced in any way, shape, and form if they've said that the Series X will natively improve the Xbox One games, so it may have some slight benefits too, but it won't be the full patched version, next-gen version of the Series X version, if you will. Now, they've also said that Cyberpunk 2077, the game is done, the game is complete, so they should be completely fine and on track and on target for their current September release date, as it is at the moment. They're just spending all this time polishing everything up and all as well. This fits in line with what they said a couple of months ago when they delayed the game because it was supposedly running like a piece of shit on the piece of shit consoles. But This makes perfect sense. Back then, if the game was 99% complete, I'm sure they finished that 1% in the meantime, and they're finally getting it running at 24 FPS instead of 12 FPS on that hardware. So, yeah, I'm sure they're improving all that and optimizing all as well, too. Now, what they've also said is that should there be any issues when it comes to manufacturing, shipping, producing, anything to do with the physical versions of the game due to the coronavirus and the unseeable or the uncertain future, uncertain foreseeable future and all as well, that they have plans to just release the game digitally, which is interesting because this goes completely pretty much in the opposite with what Naughty Dog is doing with The Last of Us Part 2. Then again, The Last of Us Part 2 is going to be a bigger game than Cyberpunk. Mark my words. Mark my words. But speaking of Cyberpunk 2077, we do have one other topic to talk about when it comes to the game as well. Now, keep all in mind what I mentioned about smart delivery, launch timings and all that I mentioned a minute ago for Cyberpunk, and let's talk about this one. So Microsoft have announced that there will be a limited edition Xbox One X. I'm going to say that again, an Xbox One X, not an Xbox Series X, with Cyberpunk 2077 designed console and joypad. Now it also comes with a digital code for the game, and this bundle will be available in June. You may be wondering, oh Q, how are they giving you a code in June for that? It's easy, it's a code, you redeem it, the game downloads in September when the preload properly becomes available. It's pretty obvious stuff. Now it's not like it's a physical copy included with it. Now, here is why I wanted to talk about this. Because despite the game not being available until September 17th, and this console bundle being available at some point in June, this begs the question. This console bundle is likely going to be €500 or $500. I know Xbox One X's are on sale, they're cheap, no matter where you go at the moment, you can pick them up for something like €300, $300, whatever it is, but this is going to be a brand new one. It's not like they're going to launch this at $350 or $370 or $400 or something. This is likely going to be at full Xbox One X price. Now, it comes out in June. The game comes out in September. This Xbox will likely come out in probably November. So why not spend that money on an Xbox Series X? You'll already get the Xbox One X version of the game at launch on Xbox Series X. Because of the smart delivery on the Series X, and the full version won't be ready until later. But who's going to spend €500 on a dead console? In fact, one of the worst and most dead consoles ever in history. A few months before the next generation comes out, that will be backwards compatible, better, even using backwards compatible titles, and it will be roughly the same price. I say roughly because, it might be €600 or something like that, but it's very strange. The timing is very poor. I feel like they're just trying to capitalize on Cyberpunk 2077 as much as possible, but I just don't see this as a good idea. Who's going to buy this at all? It's very, very questionable to me. These things are going to be left over. I don't care how hyped people are for Cyberpunk 2077. These things are going to be going on clearance down the line because they're just not going to sell. But anyway, we can talk about our normal final topic now next up, because we have the ESRB, which is, the rating boards and all that too. Now, there's much talk about them lately saying that they're not going to be shutting down and game certification won't be delayed because of coronavirus. This, of course, is in response, if you will, to the Japanese version, which is CERO, CERO, not to be confused with the negative energy blast lasers that the bad guys can do in Bleach. But they're shutting down and they're working remotely and whatnot in Japan to work on certifying games and all. Games could be delayed because of certification. Announcements and stuff could be delayed because of certification. But the ESRB have said that won't be the case for them. But that's not why we're talking about this one, because it is more interesting that they've actually included and come up with a new rating for rating video games. So what they're going to do is they're going to now have, they already have one for in-game purchases and all that too, like say, I don't know, season passes, and I mean they all have them for anything that has an in-game purchase. But they have a new one a new version of that. It's in-game purchases, and then in brackets it says includes random items. Basically, it's one that describes a loot box or something that you can't see, if you will. I know in some countries, the ESRB only applies to America, of course, or at least North America. I don't know if it applies to Canada, but obviously it doesn't apply to here in Europe. But for example, in some countries in Europe, if you go to buy, say, an Overwatch box, you can see what's in that box before you buy it. Now, it's account bound, so that will never change until you buy that box. But obviously, because it doesn't apply like that in the US, it has a way that they're still technically random, because you, even if it is account bound, you don't know what's in it until you buy it, of course. So it also seems that there's no minimum age on this rating. So when you look at any game that will allow including in-game purchases that include random items, FIFA Ultimate Team, I think that has card packs that include random footballers and stuff like that as well. Overwatch, if you can't, in the US, you can't see into the boxes, so it's still random, if you will, as well. Now, these are relatively low-age games. GTA, for example, or anything that could be rated as I suppose in America it would be a mature or adults-only based game. So there doesn't seem to be any minimum age for this. So in theory, you could buy like FIFA, which is probably like age 3 and above, and it could have in-game purchases including random items. So even things like FIFA, Fortnite, and other kids games like them, yeah, they're still gonna have all of that stuff in it. But it is promising that they're starting to work towards, granted it's very slowly and very poorly, but they're working towards improving the situation about how much developers want to rip people off, fleece people, not develop true games and content, and just make their money in this shitty kind of way. But of course, that brings us to almost the end of our 53rd episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast, because let's face it, it wouldn't be After Dark with Midnight Q if we didn't have everyone's favourite segment. Q, what's up? What's going down? What's going on? What's the 411? What are you playing? Well, I have had a very, very busy 2 weeks when it comes to gaming this time. So, I've been playing a lot of Borderlands 3. This is mainly from last week, of course. And I've completed the main game. I went back, started on True Vault Hunter mode, and I continued on to get both DLCs and finished both of them. Good stuff, enjoying both of them. Of course, Animal Crossing marches on, because why wouldn't it? It's a highly enjoyable game, and there's reasons to play it every day. I still have a lot to do in it, so once that gets 100%, I gotta organize the island exactly the way I want it, and then I gotta work on bringing in all my collections, stuff like the fish, stuff like the bugs, stuff like the, what are they called, the dinosaur fossils, and of course there's all sorts of other stuff, and finishing up with all the specific 10 villagers that I want. That's a big important one. It's also been a very turbulent week as well, because the lack of Final Fantasy VII Remake at launch has sent me to dark places. I have been in a dark downward spiral, and it's been a roller coaster of emotion in a glass case of emotion. It's pretty bad. I mean, to the point where I even resubbed the Xbox Live Gold for 1 month in order to play Halo 5 Warzone Firefight online. Yeah, feels bad. And just to give you, if you think that one's bad, just to give you a real dark, deep, depressive look into just how far and how low I sank while waiting on this game, I connected my PlayStation 3 through standard definition RGB SCART to my PVM and ran Metal Gear Solid 4, one of the worst games ever made, just to try it out on that. Of course, I promptly turned it back off because I remembered very, very, very hastily why I hate that fucking game so much with an absolute passion. It's so ridiculously bad. I started Wild Arms 3 as well. Hopefully I can, I was thinking hopefully I could power through it anyway and get as much done as possible before Final Fantasy VII Remake. It looks amazing, of course. Well, it did at first. There's a caveat with that because I did start playing it on the PS2 using RGB SCART connected to the PVM, and it has an NTSC mode, which means it runs at 60 frames per second. Of course, it's cel shaded and has like a brushed artwork style similar to Valkyria Chronicles. And of course, using that on a CRT PVM, the colors pop so good. It's so smooth, so slick, so amazing. However, my disc is not in the greatest of conditions, and I have come to a point where I cannot progress because of damaged disc. DDS, damaged disc syndrome. Feels bad, man. Feels bad, man. So I did go ahead and buy the digital copy on the PS4, started playing on there, but it just took me out of it. I was just so disheartened and so dejected by the whole situation that it felt like I couldn't do it. So that was a fun €15, well spent, if you will. Now, on top of all of that, I did power through Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 2 a bit last night. Well, I shouldn't say a bit. I did complete both of them. Originally, I was only going to do Resident Evil 1. But I did Resident Evil 2 because it was more so in honor. The original voice actor of Leon S. Kennedy from Resident Evil 2 recently just died the other day. So I figured it was only fitting I do a Leon's campaign of Resident Evil 2. Great game. Such an amazing game. I love it. So good. Just like the first one. But on top of all of that, today I've really been feeling in the mood for a Quantic Dream-esque, almost Telltale-esque style game. Now, there's plenty out there. I don't want to replay Heavy Rain at the moment. I don't want to replay Beyond Two Souls. I don't want to replay Detroit Become Human. Of course, there's Until Dawn from Supermassive Games on the PS4. I've already played that a couple of times. I don't really want to go back and do that just yet. So I've been looking for something in that kind of style because I really don't have a huge amount of time. I basically have what's probably just over one day, so I don't have a huge amount to do for it. Now, what I was going to do in the meantime is I gave Man of Medan a try, because that's actually from Supermassive Games as well, the people behind Until Dawn, but thankfully it's not limited to PS4 hardware, so I can run it maxed out on PC at glorious 60 frames per second. However, it doesn't do it for me. Based on the demo that I played anyway, it doesn't do it for me. Until Dawn, you can look at, and it feels like Until Dawn felt like a cheap teen slasher B movie in the best of ways. It felt really good. It was done in the best of ways. But when I look at Man of Medan, it plays like a cheap, low budget, rushed game. So it doesn't have the same feel. It doesn't have the same vibe that the likes of Until Dawn had. So I think, unfortunately, that's going to be a no for me, dog. Now, all of this culminates in one important thing to note. The progress, the situation in progress, I'll give you the updates of Final Fantasy VII Remake for me. Of course, I ordered the Soldier First Class Edition at some point last year when the pre-orders went live. In January of this year, I paid for it. You had the option to pay for it in advance. In January of this year, I paid for it in advance just to get it out of the way so I didn't have to worry about it. There was no potential issues or anything like that. And then, of course, the game was delayed and whatnot too. Now, you may remember that recently I talked about getting a shipping notification. I believe this was on maybe the 26th or 27th of last month. There was a shipping notification that told me that my copy had shipped. So I was hyped. I figured I'd get it within 2 or 3 days, and I was like, "Yep, that's gonna be cool. I'll get it like 2 weeks before launch." Blah blah blah. And then Square Enix announced a day or two later that they were shipping preemptively games early on purpose to get the games to people at launch because of shipping delays with coronavirus and all that stuff. Now, of course, I got my tracking info and all as well. My copy did, in fact, ship from the Square Enix warehouse in France on the 27th of the 3rd. This copy left France on the 1st of April. Reminder, Final Fantasy VII Remake officially launched on April 10th. Now, I had about 2-ish weeks of silence. I would frequently, several times a day, check the updates or check if there were any updates on my shipping, which was via courier, tracked shipping via courier, by the way, from Square Enix, from France. And up until the 17th, which was yesterday, there was no updates. So the package shipped on the 27th. It left France on the 1st. It arrived in Ireland on the 17th. That's right, over 1 week later, post-launch, not even including the 2 or 3 weeks before launch where it shipped. I still do not have my copy of one of the most anticipated games of all time. It's been dark. It's been deep. Feels bad, man. Feels depressed, man. Sent me to some questionable places. Questionable is saying it lightly. Now, we have some positives to take away from this. One, I contacted Square Enix a few days ago to talk about this. They apologized for the situation, and of course they said, well, given the COVID-19 and shipping restrictions and all too, there's nothing we can do about it. Unfortunately, these things take a little bit longer, but we will refund you the cost of the shipping. I'm like, okay, you know what, that's fine. They refunded me the cost of the shipping. That was nice of them. So I didn't even expect that, but that was no, that was promising. That was a good extra little bonus. Now, on top of all of that, a friend of mine who ordered the same time I did, paid the same time I did, got his shipping notification the same time I did, got the updates the same time as I did. He received his copy today, Saturday. It's very, very rare stuff happens on a Saturday. Couriers and whatnot too. Now, he lives in the next town over from me, which is only about 2 or 3 kilometers away. Very, 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 very short distance. But he does live within the same town as the primary regional sorting hub. So it's kind of understandable that he got his today. He texted me this morning, said, yo, expect your copy. Listen out, you might get a delivery today. I'm like, why, did you get yours? He goes, yep, came a few minutes ago. I'm like, oh, bruh. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So tomorrow was Sunday, so that won't be happening at all. So, Monday, D-Day, FF7R Day, 0 hour, 9 a.m. And I'm going to be high on excitement by then. I better at least anyway, because I'm losing my mind without that game. But anyway, that is it for this week's 53rd episode of our Quack Experimental Podcast, After Dark with Midnight Q. So, in the meantime, feel free to let me know in the comment section below any thoughts, feelings, questions, opinions, salt, butthurt, whatever it is, with anything we talked about here today. Until then, I'll see everyone next time. Hopefully, you will see me refreshed, reinvigorated, rejuvenated, thanks to the live stream from Final Fantasy VII Remake. Anyway, until then, I want to thank everyone for watching. Of course, as always, sticking with me through all of this. Hit the appropriate button to let me know how I did on the video, and while you're at it, why not head on over and hit the subscribe button and even ring that little notification bell. Granted, getting a notification from YouTube in current year about a new video upload, a live stream, or, well, a Final Fantasy VII Remake delivery can be a whole other story. But hey, at least you can say you tried, am I right? As always, thank you so much for watching, and remember, winners don't play switchboards.